Perfect. Okay, Lulu, fire away.
Hi everyone, it's absolutely lovely to be here for the second PR workshop session. My name is Lulu. I am a Senior Account Director at Fieldhouse Associates. I've been there for the last 5 years. It's our last day in Covent Garden today. We're moving to Holborn, but we have been there for the last 5 years. Fieldhouse is 12 years old, coming up 13. We're a B2B PR agency, and we're completely focused on the high growth tech sector. So what that looks like is 3 buckets. The first one is your classic high growth tech company, anywhere from kind of pre-seed right up into IPO. But I would say our sweet spot is sort of seed, C plus to Series B and C. The second bucket is investors. We work with a number of investors, I think 13 on retainer, and then we do a number of projects with other VCs, and that's anyone from Emotion Ventures, which is Jaguar Land Rover's CVC arm, sort of to Triple Point Ventures, which is a seed, or right up to, we did a project recently with Lightrock, which is more of a private equity company. And then the third bucket is professional service firms. So think IP lawyers, or we have a tax, which is just looking to support SMEs within the ecosystem. And we do everything from messaging, positioning, media relationship, relations, thought leadership, and events and awards.
Perfect. So how should a founder think about starting their PR strategy? Do you see people, especially in the pre-seed, seed stage, focus on a specific event they want to, or I say event, but like, funding around product launch that they want to get out in the press? Or do people usually start with like, okay, blank slate, we don't have anything coming up, but we want to start creating a strategy now? Like, where's a good starting point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think typically, early stage businesses, everybody, it's great to get PR, but I think the first thing that you need to kind of figure out is, what is your commercial objective? What are you trying to get out of it? Is it customers? And therefore, do you need to be targeting more vertical media? So if you're an insurtech, do you need to be looking at the insurance press? Are you looking for investors? Therefore, it's much more sort of tech and investment focused. So do you need a profile in UK10? Do you need to be, talking to TechCrunch, Sifted, or are you looking, for really techie talent? And therefore, do you need to be doing, showing that you really understand the nuances between AI and regulation, and the policy changes? So I think the first thing to think about is like, what are your needs? And as a really early stage business, typically it is a mixture of all three. Everybody is looking for investment. Everybody's looking for, really good talent and customers, etc. But usually we'll have something that is higher on the priority list. And then in terms of like, what is the most important part of your story, and what are the most important elements of that story, and put them, as close to the top of whatever you're sort of sending to a journalist or engaging with them. And then kind of figure out how to get the attention of that journalist, or event or podcast. So yeah, I think the best thing to think about is your commercial objectives, and then you can kind of go from there. If you have a story to go with, amazing. Funding rounds are obviously a really, really good way to engage media, and they always, pretty much can guarantee they will result into some coverage. It doesn't matter. I think I get a lot of, founders asking, oh, well, my round's only X, or, my investors aren't exactly who I, had hoped for. I think, given the funding environment at the moment, all funding is amazing funding. And it's just about how to kind of engage the audience. If you have a product announcement, my only question is always, is it actually of interest? Is it that you've sort of updated your systems, or is it that you're absolutely transforming the product and now you can do something that is really a real first in your industry? Typically funding is an easier way than a product update, but equally can be exciting. Is it a partnership with a really well-known person within your industry? Therefore, is it much more interesting to industry media or vertical media, as we touched on? Just really thinking about all those reasons why. Coming back to why is it interesting? Why are you doing it? And I think that's really important.
I'd love to hear from the founders watching what category you fall into, or like what would be your why to get press. That might help us shape the conversation a little bit. I'm guessing a lot are going to have their why is going to be funding. And so I guess the question from there would be if I guess they can't announce, the intention would be to get investor interest. So how do you get investor interest if your press release isn't we've closed X amount?
Absolutely. And that's something that comes up a lot, is how do you get the interest of investors without having the investment first. And I know that might feel like a little bit chicken and egg, but essentially there is a number of trade publications that do profile. My biggest recommendation is for businesses, pre-seed and seed stage, looking to get that investor interest, is reach out to a couple of the trade publications. So UK10, Tech EU, Tech Funding News, and say, can I do your founder in 5 profile? UK10 does one. Tech Funding News will talk to, do profile stories on Fridays with, CEOs. Like there's so many sort of, trade things that you can then leverage on your social media, across all your sort of social media platforms, particularly LinkedIn, that will gain the interest of investors. The other way is Startups 100 every year is one of the biggest indexes. They do lists of the sort of most up and coming top 100 startups. That's a really good way to do it if you're too small for that. Tech Round, which is another trade publication, does this amazing best pre-seed startups, or 10 best, that's a really good way to get investor audience. And then you can also, and that's stuff that you can do yourself. And I think that's what I hope we can get out of this session, is that PR is expensive. So it's probably, it might not be the right time to engage a PR agency, but there is so much stuff as a founder you can do yourself. But you've just got to put a little bit of time into it.
For the founders looking to get on one of the top 10 pre-seed lists or something like that, what's the best angle to do that? The criteria for their selection isn't clear. How do you make sure you get on that list?
Yeah. So if you look up the journalists, if you just say Tech Round journalist, for example, I think Dana is probably the person that puts the lists together. I think her email is actually dana@techround. Often on websites, like on Startups 100, they will have when all their lists are coming out, when you need to apply by. A lot of them give you that in advance. They'll have some sort of content calendar on their website. And the other way to do it is figure out where the list was in 2023. So if it's top 50 SaaS companies and you're a SaaS company, go look at, when did they do it in 2023? And they'll almost certainly be doing the same content calendar each year. Figure out a few months before, reach out to them. On socials, they always say, we're looking for the X company, we're looking for Y company. Sifted put a call out for startups. If you sign up to their newsletters, they will have at the bottom of their newsletter what they're looking for at the moment. It does require, obviously, it requires time, which I know is tough as a founder, because you don't have much time, but it's so important, and it's so much easier in a way than I think people make it really complicated, and it's not. It's just about doing the right research, the right publications, and using up some of your time.
For the founder features you mentioned, when the founders are preparing their outreach, are there any key storylines or messages that you see typically resonating really well with journalists?
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds really obvious, but is there, there's obviously female founder companies get 2% of funding. Journalists are always looking for those types of stories. Are you a founder of color? There's obviously those types of things, but also equally, what is your background? Are you a yoga teacher turned entrepreneur? Are you an asset manager turned entrepreneur? What's your background that would make it interesting for the journalist? Because they like interesting stories. So if you've spent 10 years in the military and now you're looking at a defense tech company, there's so many angles that you can use. So really using your personal story is so important. And I think I do see time and time again, people not leveraging that. And yeah, your background as a really early stage entrepreneur is your best bet of getting in there. So using your own story as you say, is so important.
Is there any link between like self-promotion and your socials and getting a journalist's interest? Like, are journalists more likely to respond if you have a lot of Twitter followers or LinkedIn followers, or does that not really matter?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everybody's looking for what stories are going to get the most views. So I think, of course, like having a LinkedIn presence and having a social media profile is great, but I honestly don't think I really don't think it's the be all and end all. I think to attract new customers and investors, though, it's really important to have some kind of online presence. So if you're in an article and not putting it anywhere is not, you're only then doing half the job. You've made it, like, you've done all the hard part, you've got into UK10, and then what? And then posting it on your socials and then posting on your company socials is a really important part. But I don't see it as the be all and end all at all.
Okay. And talk to us a little bit around timing. So if founders have something upcoming that they're preparing that they want to get press for, what's the timeline? And then also, if you're responding to a journalist, what sort of like timeline should you expect for when the piece would be released or something like that?
Yeah, timing is so important, and that's for many reasons. One of the biggest ways to get into the media is to align yourself with the news agenda. So government changes, policy changes, EU AI Act, following those sorts of key kind of stories is a really amazing way of getting into publications. We get seed companies into the Financial Times, and that's because we completely are leveraging the news agenda to fit what journalists are wanting to write about. But even sort of on the other spectrum, days, for example, International Women's Day is a really good example. So 8th of March every year, happens every year, it is, you can align something with that. However, on the flip side, it's an incredibly crowded day. So you've got to really balance like days, the way the news is going. Another kind of, it was awful at the time, but we were working with this really big VC. And then COVID, a lockdown happened, and we were meant to announce something really big, and you can't do that because the problem is that the agenda is gone in another way. So you can't predict the news agenda, but there are definitely like times, that every year the government does the spring budget, there's the autumn statement, and you can really leverage that to your advantage. You can reach out to a journalist and say, hey, I've got some really interesting ideas around this policy. Say it's really important to you, it affects your business. Is it Mansion House reforms? Is it, what is it within the news agenda that you can kind of link your business to? And just, timing is everything, but it also can work to your advantage and it can work against your advantage. So just being open to that, things change. You might need to move things. But the final thing to say about that is, if you have the luxury of time, you've got a big product announcement, you can launch that in, we like to say that if a Series A company is raising their Series A, it's an 8 million Series A round, we write the press release, we then have a week of pre-pitching journalists. So give journalists as much time as you can if you're able to. So planning ahead is really important in terms of timing.
Okay, that's really helpful. In terms of an outreach piece, what's a traditional format for that email that founders should follow? Or is there one?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a press release itself, so that's we can talk about press releases soon and what I think should be in a press release. Every press release should be, should have the same kind of thing. But above that press release, I think that the key information that you need to give that journalist is, hi, this is what is being announced, one sentence, then 3 key points. I always say key points. These are who's invested. This is what they're using the money for. And this is the size of the market, as an example, like a really condensed pitch, really short. Like, do you need any imagery? And then one final sentence, which says, do you need any imagery? Or happy to kind of have a chat on the phone over this. Best wishes, Lulu. So keeping, being aware of journalist time, which is very time poor, is the best way to kind of reach your target goals. So yeah, being short, concise, considered is really important.
Okay, that makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about, we'll dive into press releases in a second, but like
Yeah.
in terms of overall relationships with journalists, how many should a founder realistically kind of like have in their Rolodex? If you're thinking maybe I'm gonna have a story or funding round in like the next 6 months and I want to start preparing, how many, like I guess from a founder perspective, maybe you, if you want to do a funding round, you expect to reach out to like 100+ investors to be able to get like the 5. Is there a certain ratio like that for journalists?
Yeah, I think, in the way that it's slightly different than, getting investor interest. I think having, for your stage businesses, I think having 3 key media contacts would be amazing. And then that would be a real bonus. So if you have, one trade media that and you can send your thoughts to on a regular basis when something goes out. So for example, we keep talking about the InsurTech one example, but Insurance Post, I'm gonna get to know Insurance Post, or I'm gonna get to know Insurance Times, or I'm gonna get to know the insurer. Just even 1 or 2 kind of trade. And then who do you know within the tech sector? So is it sifted? You've got some really interesting thoughts. Can you reach out to Tim, who's the news editor, and will he kind of be able to help you? And then the kind of final one, which is when you're a little bit, unless you have some like really big thoughts, is someone within the kind of national media is always amazing. So Telegraph, Times, but just do research. So if you're an AI business, who are the AI, who's talking about AI? Matt Field talks about AI at the Telegraph. Okay, I'm going to ask Matt Field if he would like to get, a coffee. Can I buy him lunch? Can I buy him a drink? And just figure that out. But I don't think you need to be as wide. It's just about like, where can you focus? What's the most important for you? And it kind of comes back to that why again and again.
Is there a way about, or is there a way to go about asking a journalist like out for coffee or for a drink or something that doesn't sound like, hey, I want this drink, but like I'm gonna press you with some, news or content.
Yeah, it can be really hard and it can feel quite forced. And I think everybody goes through that kind of cringe thing of like, oh God, do they even really, do I have to offer them? But I think if you're, a company, you're solving a real problem, you've got some views on, something that's going on to the news agenda, I think the worst that they could do is not reply or say no. It's not, you guys pitch investors all the time. That must be so hard on, on your ego. So reaching out to a journalist who are usually pretty open to it. You're the CEO of this company. You can talk about these 3 things. And would you like to get a coffee? I can come near your office. Figure out, sounds a bit stalkery, but I always, if I'm going, I know that the FT offices are kind of near St. Paul's. What's a nice coffee place in St. Paul's? Can I make it really easy for them? Hey, your office sifted and more near, sort of Shoreditch way. Can I say, hey, Amy, would you like to get a coffee? I could, kind of chat to you about those things. As long as you're not being annoying and you're not asking them every 5 minutes. If you've got something to kind of give them, can you give them some background insight on something? Can you give them something off the record? And I think it's about, rather than, the way I always approach it is, what can you offer that person that makes their life easier, their job easier, and then kind of work back from there.
Do off the record comments genuinely stay off the record? Like,
yeah,
okay,
not always, but pretty much every journalist respects, particularly in the UK, respect off the record conversations.
Okay,
yeah. So it's 99% sure. I don't think I've probably only ever had one bad situation, and it was with a US reporter, and it just works slightly differently there. But if you say, I have some background information, I don't want to be named, and it's off the record, but I can tell you about something that they will definitely want to write on, building that rapport with that journalist is absolutely priceless.
Okay. And in terms of a press release, what does, number one, like what's included in it, and 2, like is a release, is that emailing out your journalist contacts, or what's that process?
Yeah. So a press release, and I'm just going to give you the sort of 10 questions that I ask every founder, and every answer to this question should be in your press release, and pretty much nothing else should be in your press release. And we're going to go on, say you've got some funding, but it works quite similarly across any sort of news. How much was the investment, or what's the kind of key part of the story? Who were the investors, and who led the round? What do you plan to use said funding for? In 2 sentences, can you explain what the company does? What problem is the company solving? How do you differentiate from your competitors? Which audiences are we targeting with the release? That doesn't go in the press release, but that's what I always ask.
Okay.
Is it future investors? Is it customers? We've kind of covered that. Do you have any clients you can talk about publicly? And are there any other significant milestones that you should be aware of? So that first header of a press release should say, X company raises 1.2 million in seed funding. Your subhead is typically either who your investors are or the most interesting fact. So we did this release a couple of maybe a year ago, and they were brothers. So that went in the subhead, but actually it could just be Ascension VC in motion co-led this round. In your first paragraph should always be who's invested, what are you using the funding for? So it should be maximum 3 sentences. The second paragraph should be what is your company kind of doing? What's next for you? Are you going into a trial? Do you have a sort of, then the sort of quotes, CEO quote, 1 investor quote, max 2 investor quotes. If you've got a co-lead, then you do 2. And then the final paragraph is any sort of other interesting information that didn't really fit into those paragraphs. The creativity comes from the quote. It does not come within the body of the press release. I say this time and time again. Journalists want to be able to basically lift what you are saying in your press release and put it onto the website. They don't want to be spending ages trying to work out what your company does. Don't use marketing language. Don't use jargon. Don't use acronyms. The only time you could maybe use an acronym is if it's like SME, but pretty much stay away from it. If it's too complicated, journalists don't have time to figure out what your company does. Make sure that it's written on that paper. And the other way that the creativity can come through and your flair can come through and your personality can come through is if you can set up an interview. Keep the press release formulaic, simple, and I promise you're going to have more of a cut through using that press release. And then in terms of media list, I love media lists. I think media lists are absolutely everything. And a good media list equals good results. Because if you're sending it out to 300 irrelevant people, you might get a couple of hits or rewrites of the, or just lifts of the press release. But if you were pitching 80 people, probably less. If you're pitching 20 people and you get 3 or 4 pieces of coverage that you can leverage across your socials, that is worth so much more than, quick wins, basically. So yeah, figure out who's writing it, target the right people. Are they actually writing about what you want, or are you trying to kind of shoehorn it in there? And I promise you'll find it a lot more successful.
I have 2 weird follow-up questions.
Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed, especially with the Sifted, is a lot of the feature stories that they have on the website have like an interesting founder photo. Either it's like they might choose like a list of founders and they choose a picture that's like of a really good looking person, or kind of like I don't know, an artsy picture. Is that worth investing in as a founder? Like, do you think it will increase your chances of getting publicity if you attach a good photo?
So that is such a good question. And yes, assets matter. They absolutely matter. But again, it's another expense, right? So I think the way that I would, really good iPhones do really good pictures. But as long as you've got a high resolution image, team photos work really well, as you say, or a really nice shot of one founder. it works really well as well. So, or is the product really exciting? So the Sunday Times, in their business section, on their front page every Sunday, they usually have what we would call an anchor picture story. So if you've got a really interesting, I think Zoe, the well health tech platform, that was kind of on there, and that's because it's got a really good product, an interesting product photo. So you're right, photos definitely lift a story, but team photos or a single photo, absolutely fine. Just make sure that they're not low quality.
Okay, that makes sense. And then my other weird question is, if you see a story, let's say a story on like Sifted is getting a lot of coverage, or it's causing a bit of a stir, everyone's talking about it. If you say something negative about the story or the piece, like let's say you retweet it and say something negative, like, oh, this seems like unfair coverage or something like that. Are journalists like keeping track of that? Are they not gonna like feature you if you say something negative about a piece that they wrote?
Oh, it's a really good question. No, I don't think so. I think actually, it was quite interesting. One of our clients recently, Flo,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
they got a lot of coverage.
yeah, how all the investors were male and the founders were male, and it was a very it was the first unicorn, and what does that say, and what all those sorts of questions came up, and one of our clients actually commented on the Sifted article and said, there's obviously positives to it, but basically said, other negative things. And then the journalist reached out to her and then put it in the newsletter and quoted her in a piece. So that was really positive, even though that she was arguing, the piece, as long as you're not rude, disrespectful, or dismissive of the journalism. If you're like, this is rubbish, maybe they won't. But if you have a sort of a nuanced view and you have a reason why you're saying it, then I think you've got, in fact, you're probably more likely for them to kind of reach out because they want the adverse view. Another example of this is with thought leadership and longer form thought leadership, which is typically on a single topic, and we pitch this a lot, but Sifted sometimes do pieces, and they do a lot of thought leadership pieces where you would pitch in a story to say, I could talk about this because I'm an expert on this. And they did a piece, one of their editorial team, and my client was like, I disagree with this wholeheartedly. So I pitched Sifted the opposite view and said, my client could talk about this. And they were like, great, give us 800 words in next week. So it can work really well. It's about being reactive or proactive or however you want to do it. It's fine to have the opposite view. In fact, it's probably quite encouraged for publications like Sifted. But yeah, just don't be rude.
Makes sense. I guess if they're releasing a piece, they want to create a conversation. So if you're adding that conversation rather than just like saying some random negative comment, then that makes sense why can be viewed as a positive.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but we're gonna move to Q&A soon. So if anyone wants to ask a question, actually, if anyone has something that they would like to get coverage on in the future and they want to like brainstorm a little bit, that might be really useful for other founders to hear as well. I'd love to hear a little bit about like at what point founders should be considering bringing on a PR agency. What are the typical costs involved in that? Like, what's that process like?
Yep, absolutely. So PR is expensive. I just don't want to beat around the bush with that. I think in lots of companies are not ready. I'd much prefer, and I do say this, and I really stand by this, is that we turn down companies that come to us and they're too early and they can't really afford it. I'd much prefer we did a singular project or a funding story, than kind of, typically our retainers for early stage businesses start at £5,000 to £6,000 per month. It can go right up until, for an early stage businesses, sort of 6 to 10. For investors and professional service firms, that's obviously can be more. But yeah, so it is really expensive. There's other ways that you can do it. So we will do like a single project. If we're just doing a single press release, we can just do one press release and do all the kind of outreach for that. That's probably going to be around £5,000 for all the pre-pitching, messaging, sending it to the journalists, getting those coverage follow-ups and thought leadership. But I actually think at most of the people, as I understand it, are probably not ready for retained PR at the moment. I think there's so much you can do yourself, as I say. And when we get to the Q&A, if you've got any sort of specific questions, I'm happy to go as specific as you want about what I think that you should do, who you should approach. And I think it'd be much better if you came to me in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and said that you were ready, and I can just help ad hoc with any ad hoc questions, up until then. So do add me on LinkedIn and ask as many questions as you like as well after this, if you prefer.
Awesome, thank you. And then in terms of cadence, for a founder who's doing their own PR, should they aim to have like X number of press pieces per year or like once per quarter, rather than just having it like, every 18 months attached to a funding round?
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends. I think if you're looking to start, getting attention of investors, I think you should really be setting aside time in your day, or time in your week, to specifically be going after press, lists, award. Is there an award you could enter? It can feel really hard. I get this. I really understand this. It can feel really hard to prioritize something like PR in the early days when you're so focused on your product or getting customers. But I think one comes with the other, right? So we have experience where it was a really early stage business, and we started to really focus on vertical media, and one article in some tiny trade equaled their biggest customer and basically got them their next funding round because they signed that customer. So it can feel hard, but yeah, I couldn't recommend more than prioritizing it in some capacity. And at the moment, as sort of founders, that has to basically be you. So it has to be led from you. And yeah.
For the founders in the chat, do you all know what source of media your customers go to? Like, who are your customers and where would they look for their news? I'd love to see some ideas of what people think in the chat. I'm going to move to some questions. We have a question from Dave. We've heard anecdotally that some news sites in our target area want exclusivity. Have you encountered this, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And yes, people do like exclusivity. And you have to weigh that up, right? Like if TechCrunch asks you for an exclusive, give it to them. So there tends to be that kind of thing. If your key trade publication is asking for exclusivity and customers is your real goal, then I would do it. I think where you've got some leverage is, for example, a sort of a funding round. What we do is we say, okay, well, we'll only give this to TechCrunch, and then we'll only give this to some trades. And that if they tend to not be competing audience, then I think that's fine. But just be really honest with them. Say, yeah, TechCrunch absolutely have the exclusive. And I would recommend it because TechCrunch for early stage tech businesses is like gold dust.
Yeah.
But equally, I think if a tiny publication is asking you for exclusivity, but you think that you've got, lots of chances with others, I would say at the moment we have sent this out to a couple of people, but I'll come back to you. But yeah, it's a really good question, and it is true. Some publications do like exclusives.
Okay. Are there any situations where you send out a press release to like 5 different news sites, and then several come back with interest, and like one has already asked for exclusivity and someone else is already running with the story and it's kind of outside of your control? Is that a stupid hypothetical? I don't know. I could just imagine.
No, it's definitely happened. We tend to be much more like we tend to, I think if you're dishonest with that journalist and you say, yeah, for sure, you have the exclusive, and then someone else does it, they're going to get really pissed off. So I would recommend not doing that. I would just say, thank you so much for your interest in it being exclusive. For full transparency, I have sent this to 2 other journalists. And that's why in the approach with kind of under embargo and sending it prior to the time of the announcement, so say the announcement is next week on the 23rd, I would say, I'm sending this story out next week at 9 a.m. We may have some flexibility and you may be able to go a little bit early, say at past midnight. And nationals and places like that really like to go at midnight, but tends to be sort of tech trade coverage. It's not that important to them to go earlier. So they might say, oh, well, sorry, we won't take this now, but in the future, if you would like to approach us with an exclusive, we can. It's all about like, it's really obvious, but just being like really nice, really respectful, really honest with the journalists. And you'd be amazed at how many that might say, oh, we'd like this exclusively. And then you say, oh, I've actually sent it to 2 other publications, but I can stop sending it to more publications than that. If you'd like to take the story, and that also is a good approach as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Question from Tasia, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. She said, what are the usual costs for an interview or article / feature? I'm not sure if this is, I think this is talking about cold outreach. So I'm guessing it's in those situations where you have a journalist from a site who says they'll cover you for X amount of money. What do you think about those situations? And Tasia, if I got that question wrong, please jump on and correct me.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And some sites do ask for sort of what we call pay to play. It can be really tough. I think I would, in the first instance, try and find just editorial opportunities at your stage. So if the publication is saying, oh, we'll do this for £300 or £1,000, and it can really vary, right, with like how much that costs, I would go back to them and say, at the moment, we're only really looking for editorial opportunities. Could you let me know if you have any of those? Or if there's anything that we can do to do that? And when we're further down the line, we would be open to paying for a profile. I would try that first, and you might be surprised. They might say, oh, well, actually, do you know what is editorial is a thought leadership piece. So if you can write us 700 words on, whatever, then please do that, and then they'll come back. So that can be a really good use of time as well, and work, but it is frustrating. And yeah, I think they don't do it to us really, because we would just say no.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would guess that they would quite often say that to early stage startups. So push back a bit first.
Okay. But it's worth responding to that and not just being like, oh, this is weird. Okay.
Yeah. Respond and see what you can get. Say, at the moment, editorial over advertorial. That's what I always say if anyone asks. Because that's what PR is. PR isn't, you shouldn't be paying really for publications, because that's getting into marketing. And that's what we're not doing.
That's a good line. I think we'll all probably copy the editorial.
Love it.
I have another question, which we've covered around PR costs with the agency, but just to summarize what you said, expect to pay around 5 to 6K for entry level monthly retainer, and then one-off stories is around 5K. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, nice. And then LZ has said, are there example PR articles? For a PR article, LZ, I don't know if you want to come on and explain what you mean. Do you mean like for a press release, or like an example of an article that's result of a PR company doing outreach? If you want to add a little bit more context, that would be much appreciated. Oh, Pretty said they're signed off. Okay, the question's going to go unanswered. Sorry. Let's see. Okay. This is kind of a comment, but it'd be interesting to hear what you think on this too. I think, Danny's talking about for her specific product. She thinks it'd be good to contact specific journalists, mapping out problems their audience is facing and why her company could be the solution. Danny, is there anything you want to come on and add or ask specifically about that?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I added afterwards that it's just an idea that I've got, because I realized that people react to issues, and I can maybe steer it back to why I'd go is the solution, because my product can help multiple people. So let's just say I went to specific prison magazines, or because I'd like to secure some contracts within that, within that organization. So if I maybe release, put inside the press release that there's this many prison leavers who are unable to settle because they don't have affordable ID, proof of ID, or access to financial tools. And this is how many people are left unemployed, and maybe just steer it back to why my product could be a solution for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on two really good points. One is the use of, is what kind of stats and what data can you give this, give the people if it is a prison publication. What I would be really careful on, Danny, and I think it's really it's a hard one, is not trying to, if you're trying to sell too much to the journalist, like, this is my solution and therefore you should talk about me because I've got the best solution. Again, we're going into marketing a little bit. So it's like, rather than when you first approach that publication, and say, I've got the solution. I think you giving stats and you saying, this is the problem, this is the size of the market. I could chat to you about some of the solutions. I honestly think that you'd get further than saying too much about your company. I always tell my, when I pitch my clients, I don't say, this amazing Series B company that is changing the globe and they're the best of the best and the best, because that again is marketing and no one wants to talk to me about that. They want to see how you can help them. So if the prison publication has a profile slot, you could say, I'd love to do a profile slot, or I'd love to write you a thought leadership on why this problem is so massive. Then I think you're going to get a lot more cut through. But statistics, you're so right, is a great way. And I also would think about beyond your vertical, particularly, if prisoners, publications, is who else is really interested? Is it personal? Like, is it current? If, what other journalists are going to be interested in that? And what types of publications are really looking at, prisons within the UK and the problems within that? Or is it sort of cybersecurity publications? Think sort of more broadly around who else might read that within your audience, if that makes sense.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
No problems.
We have a question on AI that's interesting, but Tanya raised her hand, so I'm going to go to you first, and then we'll go for the question in the chat.
Right.
Tanya, do you want to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, thank you. So I just had a quick question in terms of like with PR. I know that there's a lot in terms of people's like personal brands and company brand, and like being able to put a face to the company, and that helps. Is there a way to not like,
yeah,
I don't know, I've always been like super low-key about the stuff that I do, at least, to the point that like I've been at my own events and people don't know that I own the company,
wow.
because I don't want to be that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a really fair question, and I think it can be quite hard to navigate. Is it a confidence thing, or is it just that you don't you don't like attention, or how does that work?
I don't know. It's just a like a, I guess it's just a preference. Like I prefer my privacy. I prefer, it's a weird thing being put on a stage and a podium. Like I do a lot of public speaking.
Okay.
I have no kind of problem with that, being on a stage, recorded, done talks at conferences, that sort of thing. But like being in mainstream media or just in any level of media, that's a different kind of attention. And I like my privacy.
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think personally your brand is so much of PR. I think there are some places where you can kind of talk about, they can do company profiles, but journalists like to put faces to names, and that's very much part of their job. Another way that you could do it, if is just always ask for written commentary. Is there another person in your company? Is it just you, or is there another couple of people? Is there someone else? Is there a head of product or one other person that could be more the face? The reality is most people are going to want to talk to the CEO or founder, so it's definitely a tricky one. If it's partially a confident, but it sounds like it's not, because you obviously do lots of public speaking. I really empathize with the sort of the nervousness or the not wanting to kind of put something down on paper, but I would say in all honesty, PR will be tricky without the face.
I think it's less so like wanting to put stuff down on paper. Like I did my own PR for a conference that we ran earlier this year. But it's kind of once you start hitting more the mainstream media, and it's just like in daily life, you have to be more careful about what you say. When you run a company, you anyway have to be careful about what you say. But like I don't want to have that tenfold. Like at least right now, I retain a little bit of I can just be me. Because also as a founder, like especially at the start, well, to be fair, I don't know what other people's experiences are, but at least for me, my work is my whole life. So like I try to be able to just have that time to be me in work, but to have that completely go away, that then I have no time to be me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it might be just that PR isn't your avenue to finding these things. Maybe you need to invest in more marketing, and then you don't risk the thing. But I would say PR is very centered on people. So I think that you will find that tricky, not impossible, but it will be harder for sure.
I know Purdy has a follow-up question, so she's gonna jump in quick.
Just on the kind of profile of a founder, based on that, we had one of the co-founders of WeWork come and speak at our event earlier this year, and he just talked about this really pivotal point in the growth of WeWork, where they wanted to feature one person on a magazine cover and they didn't want both co-founders together. And so Adam Newman got featured, and it like completely plummeted him into the superstar that he was. And then Miguel, the other co-founder, like kind of sat in the background. And he was saying that he was kind of happy and comfortable with that, but like he just doesn't know the trajectory of where it would go if he would have been the person that was featured, kind of thing. And it was just like interesting for him to see it like that. But like I was just wondering whether, based on that, the publications do prefer to have like one person that they feature, and if you had, I don't know, 3 or 4 co-founders, should you be picking one who's like the spokesperson almost, or do you have like all 4 people and they all want equal coverage, or you can use like different people for different things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think in terms of spokespeople, I think as you head in towards your sort of series A and B, having a little bit more depth and breadth with a couple of spokespeople is really important. At the stage you're at now, I don't think it, I think for pitches and things like funding announcements, I think actually publications love having to show the team. So I don't think it matters too much. We like to do, there's typically the CEO or one of the co-founders is typically the more front-facing sort of face of the business per se. And then what we do is CTO, for example, has so much to offer in terms of, like the technicalities within tech, or can they write a really deep dive piece that goes into a publication like Tech Review, which is much more, and you can kind of own different areas. With VCs, it's quite obvious. It's like this person does deep tech, this person does clean tech, this person does life sciences, and you can kind of map it out a little bit easier. Within sort of small businesses like yourselves, I think it's about what areas do you all want to own? And typically you fall into different buckets, right? So one person might be the real macro, like vision of the future person, and they might be more charismatic on a call. And then you might have these, CTOs or the COO or whoever, or just the other co-founder might be more from industry. They might have come from the insurance. They might have worked in an insurance incumbent for 20 years. And really their insight should be with the trade media around giving that real deep dive information. So I think kind of having an open and honest conversation with your co-founders around what they're comfortable with. Is one person really good at podcasts? Should they do all the podcasts? And then should the other person do more of those sort of visionary pieces in the tech and investment press? So just like really mapping that out, I think it's a really good question. I think at this stage, I don't think you need to have one spokesperson. In fact, we encourage, sort of 2 or 3. We're not saying that every single person within the company, from the kind of, junior levels right up should necessarily be front facing, but I think co-founders all have a place within the media, and I think it's important to show kind of depth and breadth of the company through using your spokespeople in different ways.
Thank you.
All right, question from Dave. For a founder doing their own press pieces, what are your opinions on using AI constructively to assist you with writing your own press release? For example, to help get an idea for writing an early draft, I asked an AI engine to review my target publications, learn its editorial style, and then interview me about my startup until I felt it had enough information to suggest a suitable piece. I'm still unsure about this approach, but interested to hear your thoughts. Ooh, I'm interested to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's increasingly coming up a lot. Look, one really good example that I can give is that we had this really amazing intern recently, and he was really, really good, but he sent me a piece that he sent me a pitch, and it was so obviously ChatGPT. And I think people know. I think that's the problem. I think for background research, for looking at different publications, I think amazing. You know, sometimes like someone was saying something really complicated to me the other day, and I just typed into ChatGPT, make this easier for me. And I think using it for background research is really good. However, I think using it to draft your press release is really dangerous. In the fact, not dangerous is the wrong word. It leaves you a little bit more vulnerable, because for me, who looks at sort of press releases all the time, I can almost certainly tell. And journalists don't like that. Also, UK10, Rob Scammell, who's the editor there, I was having coffee with him the other day, and he said that they are increasingly getting outreach from smaller businesses that is very clearly AI. Being human is such a big part of PR. I think it's basically you are your currency, and don't dampen that with using ChatGPT. Keep your things human, keep your language really it doesn't need to be perfect. I actually think some of the best pitches are like 3 sentences long to a journalist, and they just sort of say who, where, and what. Then you've got a really clear call to action. But I love the creativity of asking it to do all these different things. I think there's definitely a place for AI. I think there's definitely a place for all these tools. I think there's some amazing tech coming out of through AI, and we get to look at these different businesses all the time, and I'm in awe of the things that AI can do. But in terms of using it for PR, I think research, yes, background, yes, finding targets, yes, finding events, yes. I actually asked it the other day to find me 5 SaaS events or 10 SaaS events, and 5 I was like, super relevant, perfect, love it. But 5 I was like, actually, that I would never send that to a client. And I think it's about kind of reviewing. But yeah, it's a really good question.
That's great. Okay, we have maybe time for one more if someone wants to put a question in the chat or raise their hand. If not, Lulu, where can people find you?
Yes, so anywhere really. My name Lulu Carter. I'm on LinkedIn is probably the best one. Just add me on LinkedIn. Ask me any questions. I'm super open to helping. If you want to get a coffee, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I'm in central London. I love meeting anybody. So yeah, please do. But yeah, I mean, good luck. I think, it's not an easy journey, and I've been at Fieldhouse for 5 years now, and it can be really challenging being a founder, and my parents are small business owners as well in New Zealand, and yeah, so I feel like I really do get it on a level. But yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
you're getting a lot of love in the Zoom chat.
No, anytime. Honestly, really, yeah, love speaking to new business, small businesses and on your journey. And I hope you get that next round of funding, all that customer, all that amazing talent.
Great, thank you so much. We will end it here. Oh, pretty.
I was going to say, someone in the chat was asking whether there's any example press releases, which I imagine you can just find online if you Google it. But if somebody wanted to find a template with those,
yeah. Well, I can send you a template that we use, and I'm more than happy to do that. But if you go onto Fieldhouse and you go into our sort of blog section, we put a lot of press releases on there, or coverage, and you can see very much you can see that kind of formula, even if it is an interview, because some of that stuff will be lifted, and try and get as much of that in there. But I'll send to you, Purdy and Em, I'll send you a sort of a template.
Yeah, great. And we'll send that round via Luma for everyone that's here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Founders, if you have any questions